הוא יכול לשקר איתך. Actually, when I was driving back morning here. Oh, really?
Right.
We're still on screen, right?
I'm debating whether we've got enough time. Okay, to do number 3. Okay. I just want to. Okay, we'll just. Let me just. She pressed record. Yeah. Okay, so good morning, everybody. So last week we spoke about the impact of Rabbi Saadya Gaon in his commentary on the Torah, and what I want to do today is I want to move on, but I just want to give one example because last time we spoke about his impact on explanation of words. Now I just want to give one, because I don't want to spend too much time on his actual content commentary. Content. So what I'm going to do is page number 3, line number 85, which became one of the most contentious explanations of his, which was brought by Rabbeinu Saadya, which was brought by Ibn Ezra. Okay? And we have the famous story of the serpent speaking and the Chamor of Balak, the Aton of Balak speaking. And Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon says the following, in line number 84, the Ibn Ezra brings it. Vayomer Rav Saadya Gaon, Acharei she'itbarer lanu, she'en dibur v'dat ki im b'adam levado, speech is a gift to man, nistarech lomar ki hanachash gam ha'aton lo dibru. Also the Nachash and the Aton never spoke. That means, don't take it literally. Rak malach diber bishvilam. It was an angel who spoke for them. That means speech did not take place, says the Ibn Ezra, in the name of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, which became in the period of the Gaonim a massive argument. And says Ibn Ezra, Ve'yeshiv aleim Rabbi Shmuel ben Chofni, one of the great Gaonim, also at that period, and he argues with them. That means Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, and because of that, this influence of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, the Rambam followed it. Rambam and Moreh Nevuchim more or less followed all these things, following Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon not to take things literally. For instance, just to give you an example, the Rambam says that the whole story of Avraham and the angels was a dream. The angels never ate, the angels never spoke, it was a dream. That means the Rambam takes away all what we think, and what we learnt in kindergarten, how the Nachash speaks to Chava, etc., doesn't take place. Don't take things literally in the Torah. And he carries on in many, many different spheres in these things, and he's got an amazing... Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon was a realist in many, many things, and besides his influence on the introduction of his Perush on the Torah, so also his impact. Let me give one more explanation of this. Okay, which in actual fact was in the hands of the son of the Rambam. The Torah comes and says the following, in line number 95, sorry about the order, Vayomer Elokim, Natati lachem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I've given you et kol esev zorea zera, asher al pnei kol haaretz, ve'et kol ha'etz asher bo pri ha'etz zorea lachem yelech hazara. I've given you vegetables, things which grow on the ground, and the trees. I'm going to take it from Rabbi Avraham ben Arambam, the son of the Rambam, to show the impact. Vayomer Elokim, line number 89. Vayomer Elokim hinei natati lachem et kol esev. Ze modia shemazon ha'adam haya tzomeach. The food of man was only vegetation. Mipnei she'achai lo utar liot nizon bo, ela achar hamabul, only after the flood. Ba'amaro yitale kol remes asher hu chai lachem yeh l'ochla. Kvar biarnu b'zeh b'sefer, the Arab book which he wrote, uvi'eh oto mi shekadam lanu. ורבנו סעדיה אמר שטעמו שזה על פי רוב. Majority of the food was vegetation. עוד אמר רבנו סעדיה, והראיה על כוונתו בזה אל הרוב, מאמרה את כל עשב ואת כל עץ, והאדם אינו ניזון בכל צומח. You can't say everything, every piece of grass and every piece of wheat and every piece of barley goes to man. שאינו ניזון בכל צומח, שהרי אין כולו מזון אנושי. You can't take the pasuk literally. What does he say? הנה נתתי לכם את כל עשב. Page number 3, line number 94. Pasuk says, את כל עשב זורע הזרע. What do you mean? Man eats grass. So Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon says, don't take the pasuk literally. ואת כל עשב ואת כל עץ, והאדם אינו ניזון בכל צומח. Man isn't used food from anything which grows. שהרי אין כולו מזון אנושי. Not all that grows from the ground is actually edible for man. וקצתו ההפך. And sometimes it's the opposite. מן המזון. Sometimes for man, certain vegetations are poison. Some hamavet. Now, if we look in the explanation, the long explanation of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, which I brought in front of you, the way he breaks down this pasuk, it's quite amazing. That means Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon had his own perush on the Torah. Now I want to go to the next revolution of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, which is page number 4. Now, perhaps one of the greatest miracles which takes place in the history of the Jews is not only language, Hebrew, but the calendar. The Jewish calendar. And the Jewish calendar, okay, which we know is made up of solar cycle, a lunar cycle together, not like the Muslims who have only a lunar cycle, and that's why Ramadan falls every year in a different month, goes round and round, lunar cycle. Okay? Christian is solar. With us, because the Torah comes and says, Pesach has got to be Chodesh HaAviv, and Sukkot has got to be Chag HaAsif, and the only times Pesach can be Chag HaAviv is if you live in the northern hemisphere, and Sukkot is Chag HaAsif because you live in the northern hemisphere. Okay? And if we go only according to the lunar cycle, then Pesach doesn't always have to be in Chag HaAviv, and Sukkot doesn't have to be Chag HaAsif, just like Ramadan. The answer is what we know as Sod HaIbur. Sod HaIbur is the secret of how the calendar runs. Now, so let's look in the Torah.
I'm laughing because Austin had a problem trying to figure out why a different month every so often there was a huge sale of Bamba, sweet Bamba, their product Bamba, and eventually they realized that it was during the Ramadan, which was a different time each year.
Okay. Right. Okay. Now, anybody looks in Hilchos Rosh Chodesh in the Shulchan Aruch will see the secret of how we know each year when it's going to be, when each month is going to be. Now, what is the order? Says the Torah in Siman Taf Chaf Chet. Zehu Seder, line number 5, page number 4, line number 5. V'zeh Seder HaChodashim. Tishrei le'olam maleh. Tishri will always be maleh, 2 days. Tevet le'olam חסר. ואילך, אחד מלא ואחד חסר, על הסדר. כיצד? טבת חסר, שבט מלא. אדר חסר, ניסן מלא. אייר חסר, סיוון מלא. תמוז חסר, אב מלא. אלול חסר. ובשנה מעוברת, אדר ראשון מלא והשני חסר. 1 month isn't mentioned here. 2 months, sorry, aren't mentioned here. Let's go over it again. No, זה סדר החודשים. תשרי לעולם מלא. טבת לעולם מלא. ומטבת ואילך אחד מלא ואחד חסר על הסדר. כיצד? טבת חסר, שבט מלא. אדר חסר, ניסן מלא. אייר חסר, סיוון מלא. תמוז חסר, אב מלא. אלול חסר, ובשנה מעוברת אדר ראשון מלא והשני חסר. 2 months are missing here. Cheshvan and Kislev.
But ER is always Malay.
He says that.
No, ER
Nisan Maleh, which means there are always 2 days Rosh Chodesh Iyar. That it works the other way. It's always, Nisan is always 29, 30 days.
Yeah, okay.
Right, that's what it means. Now, anybody looks in the calendar, you will always find that sometimes Cheshvan is 2 days, Rosh Chodesh Kislev is 2 days, sometimes Chodesh Kislev is also 2 days. That's why some years you will have that there will be 2 days Chanukah of Rosh Chodesh, or 1 day. Okay? Now, how does all that work out? That is the order. Now, when do we know when Chodesh Kislev is going to be 2 days, and when does Chodesh Cheshvan sometimes 2 days? That is known as the following statement. Says the Rambam, לפי שאמרנו בהלכות אלו, שבית דין היו מחשבים בדקדוק, ויודעים אם יראה הירח או לא, יראה. That means the Beis Din exactly knew when the month, the molad will be. ידענו שכל מי שרוחו נכונה וליבו תאב לדברי חכמות, ולעמוד על הסודות, יתאווה לידע אותם הדרכים. How do they know these things, says the Rambam? Okay? שמחשבים בהם עד שידע האדם אם יראה הירח בליל זה או לא יראה, ואל יהיו דרכים אלה קלים בעיניך. Don't think it's also simple. מפני שאין אנו צריכים להם בזמן הזה. שאלו דרכים, how they knew it, דרכים רחוקים ועמוקים, והם סוד העיבור. How do you know, says the Rambam, the secret of the calculations of the molad, etc., etc., and how they knew it? That is known as Sod Ha'ibur, the secret of how the months work. שהיו חכמים הגדולים יודעים אותו, ואין מוסרים אותם לכל אדם. Page number 4, set number 4, line number 15. ואינם מוסרים אותם לכל אדם, אלא סמוכים ונבונים. אבל זה החשבון, שמחשבים בזמן שאין שם בית דין לקבוע על הראייה, שאנו מחשבים היום, אפילו צונקות של בית רבא מגיעים עד סופו ב3-4 ימים. Nowadays people can work it out. Those days it was a lot more complicated. Now it's a lot easier. Now, where does all this begin with? The Gemara in Masechet Rosh Hashanah says, Amar Shmuel, Yacholna letikune lekule gola. People don't need to know. I can fix out the months, says Shmuel, the Amorah Shmuel, the Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Anossi. I can tell you exactly the whole calendar. I can work it out for you. Amalei Abba de Avua de Rav Simlai li Shmuel, Yada Mar Hai Milta, the Tanya Sod Ha'ibur. Do you know everything which is written in Sod Ha'ibur? Braita, look in Rashi, Yacholna letikune, I can work it out, below Riyat Edim. Ki baki ani, I'm an expert, toldot halvana, in astronomy, v'hilucha v'seder hamazalot. I can tell you I'm a mumche in astronomy. I can tell you everything about astronomy. And then the Gemara says to him, one of the Amoraim, his Talmud says to him, Yedam Hai Milta, the Tanya Besod HaIbur. Do you know what the Sod HaIbur is? Sod HaIbur, Braita Shnuya, Biramazim. It is a Braita which is taught in very, very short and hinted terminology. It says Rashi at the end, Kach Ra'iti Biyisodo Shel Rabbi Saadya Zichrono Livracha. Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon was the one who handed over this Mesorah to future generations.
What's all the hush hush? Why the sod?
Pardon?
What's all the hush hush? Why the sod?
Why is it a sod? Okay. Why is it a sod? Is because then it was. Now it's a lot easier. Then it was. They didn't want, often, if you read up about the whole concept of the Chagim, okay, for instance, we know that one of the things the Greeks fought against was to break down the Jewish calendar. Remember, the secret of the Jewish people is in language, texts, and calendar. Without the calendar, you don't have Chagim, you don't have anything. That is why, and the Karaim, we'll see later on, that's what the Karaim also tried to do, break down the Jewish calendar. And the miracle of the Jewish people was that only once in the history of the Jewish people, which we'll speak about in a minute, was there an argument how the calendar will be for this particular year. It doesn't make any difference whether the Jews were in Yemen, Europe, Spain, Morocco, Far East, they always had the same calendar.
Didn't Hillel do this hundreds of
1 minute, Hillel did it, but how? What was the formula?
Right, but if he said it,
What was the formula?
why did we have
Who was the formula? Who was it handed over to? Remember, it's not a computer Excel format. Okay, we live in a world we don't live, now we live in an AI world. But 10 years ago, we all lived in a formula of an Excel pattern. Correct? Think to yourself, this Excel pattern was handed over from teacher to pupil. And the one responsible for handing it over was Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon. He is the one who actually formulated the calendar. Now, let's carry on.
What did they do before that?
Pardon?
What did they do before that?
We don't know. That's exactly it. We do not know what they did in Babel in the time of the Gemara. Shmuel said he did it. What did they do then? Don't know. It's not written. But Rashi testifies it. Now we'll come on to the next stage. One of the great Rishonim, okay, his name was the Shibbolei HaLeket, who says the following. He lived in 1210, born in Rome. He went to learn by the Balei HaTosfot, and then he comes back to Italy, and he wrote an amazing book of halacha called the Shibbolei HaLeket. Okay, and there are a lot of chidushim also regarding the minhagim of the Italian Jews. Anybody who's has been to the big shul of Rome will know the minhag of Rome is different, and the Shibbolei HaLeket writes about it. And he says the following. He says, we'll jump over the first thing. V'chein matzati sheishiv Rabbeinu tam. Veishiv shamati mi Abba Mari. I heard from my father. Okay? Sheshama mi rabotav, etc., etc. V'gam, I'm jumping over a line because I don't understand the middle ones. The few lines at the middle. Line number 39. V'gam Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon shemipiv anu chayim shemasar lanu sod ha'ibur. The one responsible for handing over the secret of when Cheshvan will be 2 days, and when Kislev will be 2 days, when Cheshvan will be 1 day, when Kislev will be 1 day, or like this year was 2 days Cheshvan, 2 days 1 day Kislev. Okay, the secret of that, of the calculations, was handed over by Rabbi Saadya Gaon. He is the one responsible for the Luach. Let's carry on now, and we'll see it in greater detail.
There are other considerations, like I do wrong.
But it's based on that also. It fits it in all in that. Now, the first thing we have to know is the big chidush of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon regarding the calendar. The first chidush of his was that he breaks down all what we know regarding the calendar. The Tshuvot of the Gaonim say the following. Now guys, what we're going to read now is going to shock you. Ki Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon amar beperusho. This is the Tshuvot HaGaonim. Ki ein safek meikara. El HaKadosh Baruch Hu tziva et Moshe avdo. V'hu amar liYisrael כי בארץ יהיה להם יום אחד, ובחוץ לארץ 2 ימים. Always. יום טוב שני של גלויות is not a minhag, but it's a din. הלכו למשה מסיני. וכן היה מעולם. כל ישראל עושים בלא ספק על העיבור ועל החשבון. And Am Yisrael always know 2 things. Number 1 is, it is not dependent on witnesses, but is dependent on calculations. Kiddush HaChodesh is only based on calculations, not witness orientated. Now, how do we know that? Look what he says, okay? Rishon u'shvi'i bePesach, the first and 7th day of Pesach, and the second Yom Tov is Shisha b'Sivan. Shavuos is always on the 6th of Sivan. Always. Now, how do you know that? Says the halacha, says the commentary, and this is also brought in what my Mechuter Reb Michael brought me, the Sefer HaMitzvos which they found in the Gnizah. There it's also written, I checked it up, that even in the Sefer HaMitzvos which he wrote and is brought in the Gnizah, Shavuos will always be on the 6th day of Sivan, which goes against all what we know. Because it all depends on what? On how many days Rosh Chodesh, when the witnesses came in Chodesh Iyar and Chodesh Sivan. Says the following. V'tzarich Iyon Tuva, says the great commentary of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, Rabbi Yochanan Parla. V'tzarich Iyon Tuva, lichora, ma shekara Chag HaShavuot shu b'shishi b'Sivan. What he says, that Shavuos is always on the 6th of Sivan. דהרי ידוע, הדבר ידוע, דחג השבועות לא תלתה תורה בזמן קבוע, בימי חודש כשהמועדים כולם, אלא ביום ה-50 לספירה. It is always on the 50th day of ספירה סאוימר. And ספירה סאוימר בהדיא תניא עצרת פעמים 5. Sometimes עצרת will be on the 5th day, because if חודש אייר and חודש Sivan are 1 day Rosh Chodesh, then automatically what will happen? The 5th day of Iyar will be, 5th day of Sivan will be Shavuos. If Chodesh Iyar and Chodesh Sivan are 2 days Rosh Chodesh, then when will Shavuos be? 7th day. 50 days afterwards. Sorry, the other way around. Right. Okay, haketzat shneim meleim. If they're both 2 days Rosh Chodesh, then it's on the 5th day. Shneim chaserim shiva, echad male veechad chaser shisha. Ela kfi הקביעות שלנו, where we do it is עצרת לעולם בשישה בסיוון, שאנו עושים לעולם אחד מלא ואחד חסר. אבל מעיקר דדינא, but if you look in the Torah, אין לעצרת יום קבוע בימי חודש. ואם כן לעניין מניין המצוות דאורייתא, if you're already counting the mitzvot דאורייתא, then how can you say that the mitzvah דאורייתא will always be the 6th of Sivan? It's not correct. Lo shayach, it's impossible to write lemichtav shisha b'sivan. Given the zimnin de midoraita, shishi b'sivan mutar bimlocha. V'chol gamuru, it's mutar. And you're not allowed to do, and you're only commanded not to do melocha on the day before the day afterwards. Omnam divrei nire gedivrei rabbeinu hagonim medukdakim eitev. Mishum דאזיל לשיטתו, דקביעתנו היום על פי חשבון ומעיקר דינא דאורייתא. It was always based on חשבון. Next week's parsha, okay, of Kiddush HaChodesh, what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell Moshe Rabbeinu? Not witnesses. I'm telling you the calendar. וגם דחיית עדו ראש, וכל דקדוקי עיבור שלנו, הם מעיקר דדינא. It is not default, but it's what? That is the halacha. ומעולם היו קובעים ומעברים על בי חשבון שלנו בימות משה ובזמן הבית. Now what happened? What's the story with the witnesses? וקביעת על פי ראיית הלבנה לא נתקנה אלא בימי אנטיגנוס איש סוכו. The whole story of the witnesses begins in the period of Antigonus ish Socho. What takes place then? What takes place then? Anybody will look in the Perush HaMishnayos of the Rambam that there were 2 pupils of Antigonus ish Socho, Baitus and Tzadok, and there started the whole revolution against Torah Shebal Peh. Karaim, Tzdokim, etc., etc. Who says your calculations are correct? So what did they start doing? They started proving it by seeing, looking out when the Chodesh will be. Pardon? The moon. The moon. Not calculations, looking at the moon. Ukviyut al pi riyat halvana lo nitkena ela bimei Antigonus ish Socho. ומאי דאמרינן עצרת פעמים 5, פעמים 6, פעמים 7, אינו לאחר תקנת אנטיגנוס. This only comes after the takana of Antigonus.
Antigonus who?
What?
He was a...
No, his pupils. His pupils.
And Antigonus was...
Antigonus was the pupil of Shimon HaTzadik, and in his time, his pupils went against him.
So that was way before the Mishnah. That
was way 200 years before the Mishnah. Remember, Pirkei Avos Shimon HaTzadik, Antigonus ish Socho, Yehuda ben Tama, Shimon ben Shetach, etc., etc. Yossi ben Yoezer.
So it was very early.
Very early. Right in the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash. And then they needed to start it. וזה כמבואר ביסודי עולם בשם רבינו הגאון. וכן הוא במצרף לחוכמה לרבינו עזריה מן האדומים. וכן הוא דעת רבינו חננאל. ולפי זה לשיטה זו לא יחול לעולם מדורייתא עצרת, אלא דווקא בשישה בסיוון. And he carries on and says, אבל נראה דמזה סייעתא לשיטת רבינו, Okay, this is the proof. And line number 70. וכן היו נוהגים מאז ומעולם משניתנה תורה לישראל בסיני. This was the mitzvah, working it out, calculations. עד אנטיגנוס איש סוחו, דאז התקינו לקבוע ראשי חודשים על פי ראיית הלבנה, כדי לבטל דברי הצדוקים והבייתוסים. So therefore, Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, in his world, was a scientist. He believes in Excel sheets, calculations, working everything out. Sod ha'ibur, and exactly what the Rambam says, this was handed over generation to generation.
What was the thinking against the... how did it work to go against the Stukim and the Baitusim?
Because this way they could prove, they looked out when the month will be, when the Moilad will be. And this enabled them to at least bring sometimes proofs that our calculations are correct. Sometimes. Not always. Not always. Okay? Until... but that was... How are we going to disprove the Tzedakим and Baitusim, who went against, take Reform Judaism, breaking down the whole Jewish calendar, load of junk.
How did they get Ibor out of that?
Pardon?
How does aid
Ibor
help you? Aid won't tell you Ibor from Aid Riyah, knowing which one's called Kodesh or not. When do you know when to Ibor the extra Kodesh?
No, that's something that they will know. Okay, their argument wasn't regarding necessarily. Their argument was regarding whether the calculations are correct of Kiddush HaChodesh. But obviously, Chazal, they also had to have another problem: how to fit in the solar system and which years. We know now that in every 19 years you have 7 times Shana Mu'beret. When exactly will you do that year? What is behind it all? Okay, for instance, what's happening this year? Think to yourself, what's happening this year? In Mitzvah Hashem, Chodesh Purim is the beginning of March, and Pesach will be beginning April the 1st. What will happen next year? 1 minute. What will happen next year? Why was it Shana Mu'beret? Because if you don't do Ibur, what will happen? Pesach then will be in the middle of March. The year after that, it will be the beginning of March, and the year after that, it will begin in the beginning of February, in the middle of February. Right. Now, we know it because we have a direct cycle of 2 months which go, okay? The Chodshei HaShanah have got to fit into the secular years of March, April, May, June. Okay, in a world where they don't necessarily have that, okay, how are they going to work it out? And that is Sod HaYibur. In a world of the Gaonim where you don't have direct calendars, like we have nowadays, you will get into complications. And that was handed over also in Sod HaYibur. Okay, you don't work out what goes on in the year 2026, but think to yourself what goes on in the world of 800 and 700 and 900. And here it's a lot more complicated. So that's what Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon created for us. Now comes along the Rambam and goes crazy. And he says the following, line number 80. Rambam was very young when he wrote the Perush HaMishnayos, and he knows of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon. Shita, that you're already going to the Cheshbon. He says, Ani mitpaleh, says the Rambam, Al Adam. Now he doesn't mention his name. Al Adam shemakchish umitvakeach b'davar habarur ואומר שדת היהודים אינו בנוי על ראיית החודש אלא על חשבון בלבד, והוא מאמין בכל הלשונות האלה. He really believes it. He really believes that there's no קידוש החודש על פי ראייה. ואיני חושב שאומר כן מאמין בכך. I don't think he really believed this. אלא הייתה מטרתו, his whole objective בדבר זה, לנגח את יריבו. In the period of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, the greatest problem which Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon also had the Kara'im. And the Kara'im say, look in Torah Shebichsav and see what's going on. Do we fit in what we do according to Torah Shebichsav? What are we doing here? Torah Shebichsav should really tell us Shavuos is always the 50th day of Sfiras HaOmer. Is it always the 50th day of Sfiras HaOmer? It depends on Kiddush HaChodesh. Says Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, no. We always went according to the Cheshbon. אלא הייתה מטרתו בדבר זה לנגח את יריבו באיזו צורה שתהיה שלא בצדק או בצדק. Doesn't make any difference whether he was right or not. Okay? You argue against the Kara'im because you've got to fight against them. כיוון שלא מצא מפלט מלחץ הוויכוח. He couldn't find another way of dealing with it, of their questions, says the Rambam. ומה שראוי שאתה תאמין, what you have to believe in, שעיקר דתנו בנוי על הראייה. Just the opposite, it's only ראיית הלבנה. Okay, Kiddush HaChodesh, and that's why, according to the Rambam, we are always particular to mention at the time of Mevorchim HaChodesh, the time of what? The Molad. Why? According to Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, it doesn't make any difference. The calculations. No, because that is the time when we can see the new moon. That is the time. And if there were Eidim, they're looking out for that exact time. ולשונות המשנה והתלמוד והמעשיות רבים שהראו בעניין זה במשך כל השנים מעיבידים באמיתות דבר זה. When a person learns the Mishnayos, a whole Perek Sheni of Rosh Hashanah speaks about how they used to bring, whether the Eidim were allowed to Mechalel Shabbos or not. Now, if you knew the Cheshbon, why should they go and Mechalel Shabbos? Why should they Mechalel Shabbos for it? Says the Rambam. Why should we be so particular? What angle did you see it? Are you sure, etc., etc.? You know anyway what the truth is. No, the Rambam says. The mitzvah is Riyah. Uba bekabbalah ha'amitit. I jumped a line. Amar HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim, uba bekabbalah ha'amitit melamed she'er'au lakadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe dmut levana. HaKadosh Baruch Hu shows Moshe Rabbeinu how the moon is supposed to be seen. ואמר לו כזה ראה וקדש. ולא היו סומכים על החשבון, אלא כדי לדעת אם ייראה או לא ייראה. The only reason why you need the calculations was to show the Eidim they're talking rubbish, but not the other way around. ולא שיסמכו על החשבון בלבד, ויעשו ראש חודש על פי החשבון, אם מחייב שיראה. So here we have this huge argument which takes place between the Rambam and Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon. Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, in his opinion, and the proofs of it are that it wasn't just to argue against the Kara'im. The Rambam never had the Sefer HaMitzvahs of the Rasag. He never had the new one. He knew it. Okay? That Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon held that. The Rambam goes against it.
It's unusual because you said the Rambam usually
very often relies on Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, but he wasn't scared of arguing and said he doesn't know what he's talking about.
So if Rambam was here today, he would say it would still be Rosh Chodesh can only be by Riyah.
No, because according to him, according to the Rambam, it can only be done in Yerushalayim. Obviously now there's Cheshbon, because the only time you have Riyat Eidim is if this is Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim. Okay, so the Rambam would also agree now. The question is, theoretically, in the time of the Mashiach, how are we going to keep the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh? Are we going to keep it through witnesses or not? What is the main premise of the Torah of Kiddush HaChodesh? Re'iyah or calculations. The Rambam says the mitzvah is Re'iyah. Rabbi Saadya Gaon says the mitzvah is cheshbon, calculations. Now, the final story, which takes place, which is perhaps one of the most interesting, which they only found in 1891. Let's start off. Now, I've taken it from the Talmudic Encyclopedia, and one of the great Rashi Yeshivot of Kol Torah in Beit Vagan, Rabbi Yonah Metzbach, Gaon Rabbi Yonah Metzbach, wrote a tremendous article on this subject. Now, what happens? Bishnat Hey, I've taken it from the Talmudic Encyclopedia and we'll translate it because it's quite an amazing story.
How could 1 year be translated into 3 years?
What?
In the brackets it says that that's a 3-year period.
In the 3-year period where they discovered the Gniza of Kahir. Okay? They found it and it took over 3 years before they actually managed to to manage to publicize them, translate them, etc., etc. התפרסמו לראשונה קטעי מכתבים שנתגלו בגניזה הקהירית, המלמדים שבשנת 921-923 התלקחה מחלוקת. A huge מחלוקת took place בין ראש הישיבה שבארץ ישראל באותה תקופה, שנקרא אהרון בן מאיר, לבין חכמי בבל ובראשם רס"ג, על קביעות השנים תרפ"ב תרפ"ד. In the year 921 to 923, there was a huge problem. What were going to be the calculations of the calendar? Now, the minute, guys, you have a problem in 2 years, you're going to have a problem ever after. Okay? Because time moves on and you can't correct time. Okay? So what do? What happens? Aaron ben Meir, למשפחת מאיר, היה ראש ישיבת גאון יעקב בארץ ישראל, in the year 915. ואילך ראשון לגאוני ארץ ישראל שיש בידינו פרטים עליו. They set up a yeshiva in Eretz Israel. And the Rosh Yeshiva was known as Aaron ben Meir. Now all this is because of the letters which they found in the Cairo Geniza. Okay? It wasn't known. This argument wasn't known by anybody until 1902. Right.
So how did somebody know to get there?
Pardon?
How did somebody get to just what you said about having in 1902 that they found some...
Look, what they discovered in approximately, I think, 1860s, they found the famous shul in an attic in the famous shul of Cairo, a Geniza. Okay? And they began going through it. They found it there. And there was this, it was a famous professor, I don't remember who. What was his name from, what? No, it was before Schechter. It was an English guy from Oxford. Was it Schechter? Solomon Schechter found it? Okay. My mechut is the mumche in these things. What?
The ladies found it.
The lady. Okay.
Two Scottish ladies who...
Oh, the Scottish ladies. I knew there was, he didn't start off with Schechter. Scottish ladies found, pardon? And they brought it to Schechter, Solomon Schechter. And they found it there and they began going through the manuscripts. And it was an amazing, okay, there are a few Genizot like that. There's the Afghan Geniza, and there's the Geniza of Cairo, and there's a few Genizot like that which are stuck. Okay? You go into the museum, you'll see it all there, if they'll let you in. Okay? But this was the Geniza, and this is what they managed to discover. A huge argument taking place, which they weren't aware of. Now, what happened? הוא התייחס על משפחת, line number 101, הוא התייחס על משפחת הנשיאים בארץ ישראל וישב כנראה ברמלה. סמוך by the year 920 נסע לבגדד כדי להתלונן באוזני הרשות המרכזית על מעשה האיבה והתוקפנות של הקראים נגד הרבנים. There was huge problems with the Karaim in Eretz Israel, starting with all the Rabbonim. לאחר ששב הגה את הרעיון להשיב לארץ ישראל את הסמכות העליונה, ההלכתית העליונה, שעברה מארץ ישראל בבלה מספר דורות לפני זמנו. What had happened? The center of Jewish learning was in Bavel. And he is in Eretz Yisrael. What do you mean? Where is the center of Judaism? Bavel or Eretz Yisrael? I said, it's us. People living in Eretz Yisrael. And what does he do? כצעד ראשון, התאמץ להעביר את הסמכות לארץ ישראל בשאלת קביעתם של מועד ולוח השנה. Who is the one who's going to be responsible for the luach? Who's the one? Who's going to bring out the luchot every single year? שבתקופת המשנה והתלמוד הייתה נתונה להחלטת מוסדות המרכזיים בארץ ישראל. בסוף, at the end of the year 921, או בתחילת תר"ב, הודיע ליישובי ישראל שבארצות הגלו בארץ ישראל שהחודשים מר חשוון וכסלו שבתרפ"ב 922 יהיו חסרים. He decided, according to his calculations, that Cheshvan and Kislev will only be one day. Now, ולפיכך יחול א' ראש השנה תרפ"ד ביום שבת קודש ולא ביום ב' של אחריו. Right? 2 years later, what's going to happen? You're going to have 2 days less, because if you work it out, that Cheshvan usually is Maleh, and here you knock off 2 days. The impact of knocking off 2 days in 1 year will create a bottleneck 2 years later. And Rosh Hashanah will have to change, and according to the calculations of Bovel, Rosh Hashanah in Shnat Tafresh Pei Daled would be on Monday, and according to his cheshbon, it's going to be on Shabbos. Right. That's what happens. Now, why does he do this? Okay, and now we're going to explain. What was the reasoning of Reb Aaron ben Meir? Okay, now the question is, let's just go, and I'm not a mathematician, but let's just go in line 122. Okay? In line number 122, הבעיה התעוררה עקב זה שהמולד תשרי של שנת ד' תרפ"ד חל ביום שבת רל"ז חלקים לאחר חצות היום. ועל פי כללי הדחיות של לוח השנה, דוחים את ראש השונה ליום שני, כי שהמולד הוא לאחר חצות. Usually what happens is that if the molad is after chatzot, then you push Rosh Hashanah ahead. Now, those are the calculations which is Soda Yibur. Okay? And Ben Meir said, you don't have to worry about it. Now, they'd already worked out that in the year 923, Rosh Hashanah will be on Monday because of the problems of the molad, the calculations. He said, no, don't worry about it. How do I solve that problem of pushing it back on Shabbos? I make 2 years before that, what? 1 day Rosh Chodesh, Cheshvan, 1 day Rosh Chodesh, Kislev. That, guys, is the argument. Now,
What exactly is the argument?
the argument was, okay, in a situation where I know in 3 years' time that the molad, according to my calculations, will be after chatzot on a certain time, what do? I have to, because of lo adu rosh, lo badu pesach, I move it to Monday. Okay, Rabbi ben Meir said, no, you won't move it, you'll keep it on Shabbos. How will I keep it on Shabbos? By doing 2 years before that, one day Rosh Chodesh and one day this. And that way I save myself 2 days.
What was the opposing view?
The opposing view was, no, you keep it on Monday, you don't worry about that. Now, let's go back. Line number 110. Hashinuyim Ororu Itnagdut. Line number 110. השינויים עוררו התנגדות מצד מספר חכמי ההלכה ובמיוחד מצידו של רבנו סעדיה גאון. רבנו סעדיה גאון was the Gaon of Bavel at the time. הוא אף ניסה כמה פעמים להוכיח לבן מאיר שהחישובים המקובלים נכונים וכי אין כל מקום לשינויים. Okay, there's no way of changing. I'm proving it to you, says Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon. Those in Eretz Yisrael, אך הצד שכנגד יתעקש מרה, ופרסם את ההוצאותיו בריש גלי. They published their calendar. The calendar of Eretz Yisrael is the one which is going to be what? Forever. That means there was a bit of ego here. Who is going to be the balabais on the calendar? What? It's happened before in our lifetime, eh? Who's the balabatim on Torah? Who's the balabatim on this? And what happens? Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon הגיב על כך בפנייה חוזרת לבן מאיר, בנימוקים ענייניים שהתבססו על הלכות קידוש החודש. He proves it to him. ברם, line number 117, האי אפשר היה למנוע את הקרע בין קהילות ישראל, ובשנת תרפ"ב חגגו יהודי ארץ ישראל ואולי אף יהודי מצרים את הפסח יומיים לפני יהודי בבל. Because if you only had one day Rosh Chodesh Kislev, one day Rosh Chodesh Tevet, what happens that year Pesach? Pesach will be 2 days earlier than the rest of the Jewish people. And in Eretz Yisrael, they celebrated Pesach 2 days before the Jews in Babylon. Right.
Well, it would only be 1 day because normally the Cheshvan has 2 days of
most probably it can be 2 and 2. We don't know what happened that year, but definitely there will be a problem.
Okay.
Right? יומיים לפני יהודי בבל, ובהתאם לכך, א' ראש שונה ד' שנת תרפ"ג, יהודי ארץ ישראל חגגו כבר ביום שלישי, בעוד שיהודי בבל חגגו רק ביום ה'. Now, מצב זה נמשך כ3 שנים. This argument lasted for 3 years. Until ולקראת סוף תרפ"ד התאחדו הכל לשמור על מתכונתו אחידה. They went back to accept the luach of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon. It's the only time in history, guys, where there was a machloikas over the Jewish calendar.
What happened that they agreed afterwards?
Because they all accepted the authority of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon. Authority of one person. And the Jewish people accepted, and that's why, Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon is mentioned. Now we understand what Rabbeinu Tam meant, and Rashi meant. That nobody understood, and that's what Rav Yonah Metzbach writes in his article. So nobody understood ever until this story why they always quoted Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon as the authority of Kiddush HaChodesh. But said Rav Yonah Metzbach, once, that's what the Rishonim had the Masorah. Now it wasn't written anywhere. It was the Masorah that was handed over from Gaonei Bavel to Gaonei Italia to Gaonei Ashkenaz, that the authority of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon was absolute when it comes as far as the calendar is concerned. Nobody understood it until they discovered what happened in the Geniza of Cairo. That opened up their eyes to a whole new world of what could happen if you have a machloikas over the calendar. You talk about loitis goidadu, about minhogim. Here, okay, you have this enormous problem. It was only until when they found these gnizot that they realized what was the authority and what was the revolution of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon, that from now on the Jewish people will only have one calendar forever.
And so that year they also celebrated Shavuot on a different day?
Yeah, exactly, 100%. Naturally it would be. Everything changes. Remember, one day of Rosh Chodesh creates a bottleneck for all the generations afterwards. That Rabbi Sai we've learned. Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon on mitzvahs, Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon on monetary laws, Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon of his commentary on the Torah, and Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon on the Luach, and we've only opened 4 dimensions of the revolutions of Rabbeinu Saadya Gaon. That's it for this semester, guys.
When you were doing it, I looked up on AI.
What's that?
The names of the...
Oh, okay, I forgot. Yeah, Ben Ezra, that's right, the Shul of Ben Ezra. And,
You mentioned the names of the...
Smith Lewis